Hello. So in this video, I'm going to give you basically a whole lesson plan for teaching your students to write essay introductions. So this is again another teaching strategies video. And this is actually the way that I teach my students to write introductions. Now you can do this as a 50-minute lesson or a 75-minute lesson if you teach in a university. Those tend to be the two lengths of time that classes run. You can also do this shorter, longer, whatever it is. Now, I've elsewhere made videos about writing introductions, and so those are potentially worth taking a look at because I do talk through a number of strategies. But in this video, again, is specifically going to focus on a lesson plan for teaching essay introductions. So the first thing that I do on days we're going to learn introductions is I tell my students the three major purposes of an introduction, in my view. Not everybody's going to agree on this, but for me there are three major tasks an introduction needs to do. The first is to hook the reader's interest with an attention grabber. The second is to provide any necessary background and context that we need to understand the argument that's being made. And the third is to provide the thesis. Now, I've made videos on thesis statements before, and I always teach that as a separate lesson because I think they need to be taught as a separate lesson. So I tell my students we're going to focus on the first two, attention grabbing strategies and background and context. Now, typically when I teach my lesson on introductions, I will have had students read a reading about introductory strategies for homework the night before, and possibly watched a video about it. So students do come in with some knowledge of different strategies that they can use. And basically what I do is I put on the board attention grabbers and introductory strategies and give students 5 minutes or so to talk to the people around them and come up with lists of introductory strategies and attention grabbers to think about as many things as they can based on the reading that they did for homework, things that they may have been taught before, things that they've seen in essays that they've read, or anything else that they can come up with. So they come up with a list of that. And then I have them share their strategies, and I write them up on the board. So first we start, obviously, with the attention-grabbing strategies. So things like asking rhetorical questions, starting with a quote, starting with an anecdote, starting with an interesting fact or statistic. Any of these kinds of things. And again, you can watch some of my videos on introductions to get more of these strategies. But we make that list where they come up with as many things as they can that potentially draw a reader into the essay. Then I always give students this caveat, because I think it's important with attention-grabbing strategies, is that you need to avoid sounding gimmicky. Because a lot of attention-grabbing strategies, things like starting with a quote, starting with a statistic, starting with a definition, these can seem very cheap, and they can seem like, okay, that person is trying to get my attention. And so that may not work to actually hook your readers in. So you want to be very careful about how you construct this attention grabber. So then we talk about introductory strategies, what you do to provide background and context for this argument. So you definitely want to introduce the subject. That's one of the things. We provide context, and that may be historical, that may be literary, that may be scientific, that may be legal, that may be cultural, or that may be scholarly. You want to provide some basic details, maybe preview the major points, but provide some basic details about the argument that's going to be made here. And you may want to use a roadmap. which involves explaining the structure that the essay is going to take, along the lines of, first this essay will discuss this topic, then this topic, then this topic, and it will conclude X, whatever it is. So these are some of the kinds of strategies that students tend to come up with. So once you've got your two lists there, the next thing that I do is I actually put on the projector a sample introduction. And I use the introduction from my conference presentation, what's it called? Rebuilding Barbie, I think, which is about Christine Evans's play Trojan Barbie. And I'll put a link to that, the video from that conference presentation if you want to look at it. But it doesn't really matter. Whatever introduction you choose to use, provided that it uses several of the strategies that you want your students to be able to identify. So it should have at least one attention grabber. It should do several of the things on the introductory strategies list, and it should have a thesis. So I will have a student read that introduction aloud so that everybody can hear it. And then I will give them a few minutes to do three things. So first is to identify the thesis. This can be somewhat challenging, especially if students don't know the subject of the introduction, or if they don't sort of follow the argument that's being made. But generally students can find a thesis regardless. So you identify the thesis. Then they have to figure out what attention-grabbing strategy or strategies are being used here. And then they have to identify as many additional introductory strategies as they can from that introduction. So they're basically looking for the three things that an introduction is supposed to do. And then we go through that introductory paragraph as a group, starting by identifying the thesis, then talking about what the attention-grabbing strategies are and what other introductory or background or context techniques are being presented. And then you may, and this is an additional step, if you're in a 50-minute class, you may or may not have time for this. If you're in a 75-minute class, you should definitely have time for this. The next question for me would become, how effective are these strategies and why? And you can have your students discuss that. So how effectively has this attention grabber hooked our interest? Do we want to know more based on this opening? How effectively has the set of introductory strategies contextualized this argument? Do we need more? Do we need less? Is there stuff that should be added or taken out? And why? And so this gets students thinking critically not only about the techniques, but also by analyzing a real-world example of an introduction, they see how things start to come together.